From the moment 3I, Atlas first appeared in the telescopes of amateur skywatchers and professional observatories alike, it carried the unmistakable signature of an outsider, an object forged under a different sun, shaped by a different system, and arriving on a trajectory so steep and fast that astronomers could practically hear the universe whispering, "This one is not from here." The early orbital solutions removed all doubt. Its eccentricity was well above 1, a mathematical fingerprint that marks every true interstellar traveler. And its hyperbolic excess velocity, those extra kilometers per second that no gravity well could ever reclaim, ensured one thing with absolute certainty. 3I, Atlas, was destined to leave us behind forever. The scientific community reacted the way it always does when the cosmos drops a rare treasure at our doorstep, first with disbelief, then with frantic excitement. The last time Earth had witnessed a visitor like this was with Borisov, and before that with the now infamous Oumuamua. 3 interstellar objects in a human lifetime was something no one had expected. In quiet conference rooms and late-night email threads, astrophysicists whispered that maybe our instruments were improving, maybe the galaxy was more crowded than we assumed, or maybe we had simply been lucky. But beneath that scientific enthusiasm, there was also a kind of comfort. These objects were brief encounters. They arrived, offered a fleeting glimpse of the unknown, and then disappeared into the dark again, mysterious but harmless. 3I, Atlas fit that script perfectly. Or so we thought. For months, its behavior matched every prediction. It followed the clean geometry of a hyperbolic orbit, racing inward, letting the sun bend its path by a few elegant degrees, then preparing to slingshot outward. Telescopes captured its changing brightness. Researchers published early papers mapping its likely composition. Nothing about it implied danger, purpose, or intelligence. It was a cosmic tourist, here to pass through, not linger. But while astronomers congratulated themselves on another successful interstellar catch, subtle inconsistencies began to whisper through the data. Residuals in the orbital calculations, tiny numerical ghosts, refused to resolve themselves. Observatories compared notes. Some blamed atmospheric distortion, others suspected calibration drift. A few muttered that maybe 3I, Atlas, was shedding material in odd ways. Still, no one took the anomalies seriously. Interstellar objects are messy, fragile things. Irregularities are part of the deal. Then came the moment when the inconsistencies stopped looking like noise and started looking like intent. It wasn't dramatic or cinematic. It began with researchers noticing that when they plotted 3I, Atlas' trajectory from earlier in the year, the future path was increasingly out of sync with real-time measurements. Not slightly, not debatably, significantly. The object wasn't where it was supposed to be, not because we had miscalculated, but because something had changed. And the deeper they dug, the clearer the truth became. 3I, Atlas, wasn't drifting off course. It was deviating in a way that no unpowered object should. Suddenly, that comforting phrase, interstellar tourist, felt naive. An object on a true hyperbolic escape path has no reason to slow down, no mechanism to alter its fate, and no natural ability to rewrite its own trajectory. Its destiny is dictated by physics, cold, predictable, immutable physics. Yet 3I, Atlas, had begun to drift away from the path that physics had written for it. And this is where unease turned into silent alarm. Because for 3I, Atlas to deviate, something had to be influencing it. And for the shift to persist, that influence had to be continuous. And for it to be continuous, it had to be deliberate. This realization rippled quietly through the scientific community. Nothing was said publicly. No announcements were made. But behind closed doors, astrophysicists began cross-checking numbers with a nervous intensity they hadn't felt in years. Every new dataset hinted at the same unsettling direction. 3I, Atlas was no longer acting like a passive, unbound traveler. It was acting like something that might not want to leave. And once that thought enters your mind, it refuses to leave. Because if 3I, Atlas, is not following the path the universe assigned to it, then it is following a path assigned by something else. When the first hints of deceleration appeared, nobody wanted to believe them. Objects that enter our solar system from interstellar space do one thing above all else. They do not slow down. They can't. Their momentum is ancient, forged across light years of empty vacuum, influenced only by the rare gravitational giants they happen to pass. Even the sun-dominant, overwhelming, inescapable can only bend their path, never rob them of enough energy to keep them here. Everything we know about celestial mechanics says that hyperbolic objects arrive fast, leave even faster, and never look back. But 3I Atlas had other plans. At first, the anomaly was so small that researchers dismissed it outright, a 0.1% drop in excess velocity, maybe less. The kind of thing that usually gets blamed on atmospheric interference, thermal distortions, or data smoothing. Observatories shrugged, updated their models, and moved on. But the next night, the anomaly was still there, and slightly worse, then worse again, and again. 11 nights in a row, the data told the same unbelievable story. 3I Atlas was shedding speed at a rate no known object could ever achieve on its own. The numbers were brutal in their clarity. More than 2.8 kilometers per second of excess velocity simply gone. Not transferred, not redirected, not exchanged with any celestial body, gone. As if the object had reached out and tapped an invisible brake pedal somewhere in the cold void between the planets. This is the moment the scientific community split in two. One group insisted the data had to be wrong. The alternative was too disruptive, too destabilizing, too close to a line that astronomy has never crossed. The other group, the quiet, cautious, deeply alarmed group, began to consider what the data actually implied, that 3I Atlas was decelerating in a way that no natural object ever has in recorded history. Because here's what most people don't realize. Even comets undergoing violent outgassing don't slow down like this. Asteroids struck by micrometeorites don't suddenly reduce their escape velocity. Tidal forces don't spontaneously cancel momentum. Physics doesn't simply decide to change. And yet, night after night, 3I Atlas kept losing speed. The weirdest part wasn't the braking itself, it was how smooth it was. Natural processes create chaos. Fragmentation events produce jitters. Gas jets create uneven thrust. Collisions create directional spikes. But the velocity curve of 3I Atlas looked almost engineered. No sudden jumps, no random stutters, just a clean, continuous, mathematically perfect descent. In the orbital mechanics world, that kind of precision has only one name: control. Every new dataset made the situation harder to ignore. Independent observatories on multiple continents began confirming identical readings. Amateur astronomers equipped with high-end consumer sensors were reporting the same trend. Even spacecraft telemetry started lining up with the anomaly. There was no glitch, no software bug, no miscalibrated instrument. The object was unquestionably slowing down. That's when the implications grew darker. If 3I Atlas was genuinely applying some form of braking, then it was consuming energy, massive amounts of it, far more than any chemical rocket humanity has ever built, far more than any ion drive we've ever tested. Even nuclear thermal propulsion would be insufficient to replicate what this object appeared to be doing. To change your velocity by several kilometers per second in the deep vacuum of interstellar space requires an engine on a scale that borders on the mythical. And this is where the fear truly set in. Despite all this braking, there was no exhaust, no plume, no radiation spike, no heat signature, no ionized trail, no detectable mass ejection whatsoever. It was as though the object was reaching into the laws of motion themselves and rewriting them as needed. The analysts who understood what this meant were the first to panic. In hushed conversations, they admitted that the braking was too controlled, too sustained, and too clean to be anything but artificial. Not only that, whatever force was slowing 3I Atlas was doing so in a way humanity can't even begin to replicate. No chemical engine, no electric propulsion system, no solar sail, no known reactionless drive. Nothing matched. Something was guiding that object. Something was powering it. Something was choosing to stay. And once you realize that the braking is intentional, a second, more disturbing truth emerges. The timing was not random. It began immediately after 3I Atlas finished its closest pass to Earth. As though it had seen enough, and made a decision. The kind of decision that changes everything. The moment scientists accepted that 3I Atlas was losing speed on purpose, every orbital simulation on the planet had to be rewritten. A hyperbolic object is supposed to behave like a stone launched from a slingshot. It comes in fast, swings around the sun, and rockets outward even faster, forever escaping the star's gravitational pull. But once Atlas began shedding velocity, that entire expectation collapsed. Objects moving through space aren't free spirits, they're prisoners of mathematics. Change their speed enough, and their destiny changes with it. And that's exactly what began to happen. At first, the updated models still showed a weak chance of escape. The object had started its journey with so much excess momentum that even a large deceleration shouldn't have been enough to hold it. But as the days rolled on, the excess velocity kept dropping, shrinking toward a threshold no interstellar visitor had ever been observed crossing. Once that threshold disappears, something profound happens. A trajectory ceases to be hyperbolic and becomes elliptical. In simple terms, it goes from leaving the solar system to belonging to it. The simulations didn't lie. Every major orbital lab, NASA's, ESA's, JAXA's, independent university groups, began to see the same shape emerging. A closed, bound path. A repeating loop around the Sunday. A return. A comeback. In plain language, 3I Atlas was switching from being a one-time visitor to becoming a permanent member of our solar system. But that wasn't the part that terrified everyone. The real shock came when analysts began mapping the object's potential future path once fully captured. Thousands of simulations were run, adjusting the braking profile, the timing of the slowdown, the angle of approach. And almost every single one converged on the same disturbing outcome. The new orbit crosses the region of space inhabited by Earth. Not just once, not as a brief coincidence, but repeatedly, on a schedule. Imagine a clock whose hands always pass the same point again and again. That's what the predicted orbit looked like, a cosmic rhythm that placed Atlas back in Earth's neighborhood at regular intervals, sometimes within distances that would put it closer than many asteroids we routinely monitor. Whatever was adjusting its momentum wasn't simply trapping it in the solar system, it was parking it near us. This is the moment quiet concern metastasized into outright fear inside major agencies. A natural object doesn't position itself into a resonance-like pattern with a planet. It doesn't tune its orbit to return to the same region over and over. It doesn't choose proximity. Yet every model showed that if the braking continued even a little longer, Atlas would become an Earth-crossing object with a consistency that was mathematically unnatural. The technical term is orbital resonance. The emotional term is a visitor who refuses to leave. Some experts tried to soothe themselves with the idea that maybe all this was coincidence, that the orbit just happened to intersect Earth's path. But orbital experts weren't buying it. They know the odds. They know how small the window is for an object not born in our system to settle into a stable, repeating pattern that continually loops near one specific planet. It's like tossing a dart from the top of a skyscraper and having it land perfectly on a coin 3 blocks away 3 times in a row. Still coincidentia? Nobody serious thinks so anymore. And here is the part that unsettled even the most skeptical analysts. The braking wasn't chaotic, it wasn't random, it was shaped. Each micro-adjustment in velocity shifted the future orbit closer to this Earth-crossing pattern, as if the object were adjusting its trajectory with careful, deliberate nudges. It didn't just slow down, it slowed down in the exact way needed to form this specific orbit. One orbital dynamicist at ESA reportedly whispered during a closed-door meeting, "It's not staying in the solar system, it's staying near Earth." Nobody contradicted him, because the implication was impossible to ignore. If Atlas ends up in this orbit, then humanity will face something unprecedented, an interstellar object that repeatedly returns, repeatedly approaches, repeatedly observes, not once every 1,000 years, not once every century, but potentially every few years or even more frequently depending on the final shape of its path. A presence, a neighbor, a watcher. And then came a final twist, one that gave scientists chills. During the deceleration phase, the braking curve didn't just drop smoothly, it plateaued. precisely at the point where orbital projections locked into the Earth-crossing configuration. It was as if the object had slowed down exactly as much as needed, then stopped slowing the moment the mission was accomplished. To a physicist, that's impossible. To an engineer, that's intentional. To everyone else, that's terrifying. Because now we are no longer asking whether 3I Atlas will leave. The question has become far more unsettling. Why is it choosing to stay near us? The deeper scientists dug into the numbers, the more one truth became impossible to ignore. Whatever force was slowing 3I, Atlas was not natural, not accidental, and certainly not within the realm of anything humanity has ever engineered. Stripping away kilometers per second of velocity in deep space is not a gentle correction, it is an act of raw power. A cosmic maneuver that, if attempted by any human spacecraft, would drain every tank, overheat every engine, and tear most structures apart. But 3I, Atlas executed it smoothly, silently, and most unsettling of all, without leaving a single signature of how it was doing it. To appreciate the scale of this, consider what it takes for us to perform the tiniest course corrections. Ion drives, the most efficient propulsion technology humanity possesses, produce so little thrust that you could physically overpower one with your fingertips. Chemical rockets are powerful, but they burn fuel in violent, wasteful bursts, and their efficiency collapses in the vacuum of deep space. Even nuclear thermal propulsion, one of our most ambitious, theoretical technologies, would struggle to produce anything even remotely comparable to the sustained, controlled braking observed in Atlas. And yet, this object wasn't merely adjusting course, it was rewriting its fate. Researchers began by looking for the obvious telltale signs: hot exhaust, jets of vapor, ionized trails, radiation spikes. If Atlas were using any propulsion system based on reaction mass, throwing something backward to move forward, our instruments would have caught even the faintest trace. But telescopes detected nothing. Infrared arrays found no thermal signature. Spectral readings showed no expelled gases. Space-based observatories caught no sign of radiation bursts, plasma emissions, or magnetic disturbances. It was as if the object was pushing against the vacuum itself. Some specialists floated the possibility of solar sails. But sails require enormous, thin reflective structures, and Atlas showed no such silhouette. Others suggested exotic mass ejection mechanisms, but nothing in the recorded data even came close. A few desperate theorists whispered about dark matter interactions or gravitational manipulation ideas, so speculative that no one dared present them outside private conversations. Because if you remove all the impossible explanations, you're left with something far more uncomfortable. 3I Atlas may be using a type of propulsion that does not rely on reaction mass at all. A drive that doesn't burn anything, doesn't glow, doesn't radiate heat, doesn't shed particles. A drive that violates every engineering limit we understand. A drive that shouldn't exist. In the classified rooms where high-level discussions began unfolding, the tone shifted from scientific curiosity to something bordering on dread. If the object isn't using propulsion as we know it, then whatever moves, it must be fundamentally different, something that operates closer to the underlying fabric of space-time than to the conventional physics we teach in classrooms. A propulsion system that works not by pushing against matter, but perhaps by manipulating the geometry of the vacuum itself. A system so efficient, so elegant, so far beyond anything we can replicate, that it makes our most advanced spacecraft look like children's toys taped together with hopes and duct tape. The implications hit like a punch. If Atlas arrived using this technology, then whoever built it is centuries, maybe millennia ahead of us. And that realization began to ripple through governments, militaries, and intelligence agencies with a cold clarity. If a civilization can slow down an object moving at interstellar speed with no visible propulsion, then it can accelerate one just as effortlessly. It can maneuver with absolute precision. It can dictate encounters, avoid detection, or approach without warning. It can cross star systems not with rockets, but with deliberate ease. Humanity suddenly found itself staring at a mirror reflecting our inadequacy. But perhaps the most disturbing part wasn't the power on display, it was the control. The braking curve wasn't sloppy or uneven, it was beautifully smooth, a perfect gradient that looked more like an algorithm than a natural phenomenon. Every fraction of a second, every subtle change in velocity, seemed to be calculated with intention. This wasn't a rock reacting to forces, it was a system executing commands. And if someone or something is issuing those commands, what are they preparing for? Inside several space agencies, whispers began circulating about a possibility no one wanted to articulate publicly. 3I Atlas was not an abandoned relic or a wandering corpse. It was operational, active, a functioning construct that responded to conditions in real time. It behaved less like debris and more like a vessel following a programmable mission profile. Its silence only sharpened the tension. Had it detected us? Almost certainly. Our radiation leaks into space like a beacon radio chatter, radar emissions, satellites pinging one another across orbit. Any observing intelligence would have noticed, but Atlas offered no response, no signal, no beacon, no attempt at contact. Just cold, calculated motion. A motion we cannot replicate. A power we cannot match. A technology we cannot decipher. And as the braking ended at the exact moment its new orbit stabilized, one terrifying truth crept into the minds of those who understood orbital mechanics best. It slowed down just enough. No more. No less. Like something finishing a maneuver. Like something arriving. Long before the public heard a whisper about the anomaly, before any journalist caught wind of sudden late-night activity inside mission control centers, the first people to panic were the ones who understood orbital mechanics intimately. They saw the deceleration curves. They watched the hyperbolic trajectory collapse into an elliptical prison. They ran simulations and saw Earth-crossing patterns stacking up over and over like a cosmic warning. And as soon as the implications became mathematically undeniable, NASA quietly shifted from scientific monitoring to something far more unsettling: strategic assessment. It began subtly. A handful of senior analysts were pulled off unrelated missions. A conference call intended to last 20 minutes stretched into 6 hours. Key researchers were instructed to route their reports through restricted channels. Independent observatories that had been freely sharing data suddenly found their contacts at major agencies growing evasive, responding with tight, neutral phrases like, "We're still analyzing the numbers." For anyone paying attention, it felt like the tone of the room had changed, even if nobody dared to say why. Behind closed doors, the truth was impossible to escape. Whatever 3I Atlas was, and whatever it was doing, humanity had no control over it. Inside NASA's Jet Propulsion Laboratory, engineers tried to treat the situation like any other anomalous object: collect data, build models, test hypotheses. But unlike rogue asteroids or unpredictable comets, Atlas wasn't behaving chaotically, it was behaving deliberately. And that single distinction transformed everything. Suddenly, the people accustomed to steering robotic explorers through the solar system were forced to confront a reality in which they weren't the navigators anymore. They were the navigated around. Rumors leaked of classified interagency briefings involving not just NASA, but the U.S., Space Force, the Defense Intelligence Agency, and even diplomatic channels. When an object from beyond the stars shows signs of controlled maneuvering, it stops being an astronomical curiosity, it becomes a geopolitical event, a strategic question, a potential threat or opportunity depending on who interprets the data. The world's spacefaring nations reacted in wildly different ways. The United States adopted a cautious stance, trying to gather as much data as possible while avoiding public panic. There were internal debates about whether to attempt communication, but cooler heads argued that any signal sent to a superior intelligence could reveal more about our capabilities than we intended. Europe, particularly ESA, leaned toward transparency. Many of their scientists pushed for international cooperation and open analysis. But their governments, nervous about falling behind the U.S. or China in understanding the object, quietly restricted certain datasets. Cooperation quickly gave way to guarded collaboration, everyone smiling on the surface while hiding their best cards under the table. China, meanwhile, treated Atlas like a strategic puzzle. Their astrophysics teams reportedly ran thousands of proprietary simulations, comparing Atlas's motion to hypothetical propulsion systems far outside human engineering. Military analysts speculated about surveillance capabilities, communication potential, even the possibility that the object might be part of something larger, an advanced probe, a node of a network, or the vanguard of a civilization beyond comprehension. Russia, dealing with limited resources but keen instincts, saw Atlas as a wild card that could rewrite global power structures. Their public commentary stayed dismissive, dismissing alien speculation as Western fantasy. But leaked internal memos told a different story. Their analysts took the threat extremely seriously. And through all this, the scientific community found itself torn between intellectual curiosity and existential dread. For astrophysicists, this should have been the discovery of the millennium, an event that redefines our place in the cosmos. But the tone across research groups wasn't wonder, it was fear, quiet fear. The kind of fear that comes from recognizing power so far beyond your own that comparing them feels like comparing a hurricane to a matchstick. Teams tasked with determining whether Atlas could be a threat found themselves trapped in a paradox. On one hand, the object had shown no aggression. It hadn't emitted harmful radiation, taken hostile action, or interfered with any spacecraft or satellites. On the other hand, its mere capabilities represented a form of power for which humanity had no answer. If it wanted to avoid detection, it could. If it wanted to outmaneuver our fastest probes, it would. If it wanted to approach Earth, nothing could stop it. Diplomats worried about how nations would respond if the object seemed to favor one hemisphere or approached one territory more closely than another. Military strategists debated nightmare scenarios, not because Atlas had hinted at hostility, but because planning for the unknown is what they do. And philosophers, theologians, and sociologists were forced to consider what it means for humanity's collective identity when something that could rewrite our understanding of life itself hovers silently in our cosmic neighborhood. Through all of this, NASA tried to maintain a thin veneer of calm professionalism. Internally, it was anything but calm. A phrase began circulating in private discussions. "We are not in control of this encounter." For an agency built on mastery of space, that was the most terrifying truth of all. And while every nation debated its next move, 3I Atlas continued drifting through the solar system with the confidence of something that didn't need permission. It didn't ask. It didn't warn. It didn't negotiate. It simply acted. And the world watched. As the reality set in that 3I, Atlas was not only staying in our solar system, but positioning itself in a trajectory that repeatedly brought it near Earth. A much more unsettling question emerged. It was whispered first among orbital analysts, then repeated by astrophysicists behind closed doors, and finally acknowledged by agencies who could no longer ignore the obvious. Why here? Why us? Because even in the most generous interpretation, the orbital path Atlas carved for itself was not the path of a passive traveler caught by gravity. It was the result of deliberate braking, precise timing, and carefully measured adjustments, all converging toward Earth's orbital zone like a destination rather than a coincidence. And once you accept intention, you must consider motives. 1. The scientific curiosity hypothesis. The most optimistic scenario, one championed loudly by public-facing scientists and quietly by those hoping to prevent panic, is that Atlas is simply observing us. From an extraterrestrial perspective, Earth would be irresistible. We are a planet drenched in radio waves, wrapped in artificial lights, buzzing with low-orbit satellites, leaking technological signatures into space like a beacon. If you were a civilization capable of crossing interstellar distances, discovering a young, noisy, rapidly evolving society would be the cosmic equivalent of finding a spark in a dark forest. You would watch it, study it, try to understand its potential before it spreads. A stable orbit that hugs Earth's path would allow continuous observation, long-term data collection, and the ability to track how humanity changes over time. No flyby could offer that. No brief pass could reveal patterns, behavior, or growth. It's the scientific explanation humans are most comfortable with the idea that Atlas is here to learn, not to act. But even this comforting theory opens a darker door. If they are studying us, what are they trying to determine? 2. the relay or outpost hypothesis. A more strategic interpretation is that Atlas isn't alone. It could be a node, one piece of a larger network sent to establish a presence near a planet of interest. This is exactly what we would do if we discovered a distant civilization emitting artificial signals. Humanity would send observers, relays, passive monitors, silent orbiters designed to gather information and serve as anchors for future communication. If Atlas belongs to such a system, then its choice of orbit isn't just about convenience, it's about placement. A relay near Earth could serve as a hub for exchanges, a listening post, or even a waypoint for future arrivals. This possibility kept intelligence agencies awake at night, not because they believed an invasion was imminent, but because a technologically superior civilization placing infrastructure near Earth means one thing: they're planning for the long term. Civilizations do not place outposts near planets they intend to ignore. 3. The monitoring or containment hypothesis. This is the interpretation no one wants to talk about publicly. The idea that Atlas might be here not simply to observe us, but to watch over us, in the same way a guardian or a warden watches over something unstable. From space, Earth is a contradiction. We are brilliant and destructive, innovative and reckless, capable of compassion and catastrophe in the same breath. Our atmosphere pulses with emissions from nuclear reactors, radar installations, military satellites, deforestation fires, and industrial cities. If an advanced intelligence saw all of that during Atlas's closest approach, they might have concluded that humanity was at a pivotal stage dangerous enough to require monitoring, but not advanced enough to hide it. This isn't the alien threat scenario movies love to push. It is something far more unsettling. The possibility that we are being supervised for our own sake, or to prevent us from becoming a problem for others. Even benevolent containment is still containment. 4. The intervention hypothesis. The darkest scenario isn't invasion, because if Atlas came with hostile intent, it would not need stealth or orbiting maneuvers. It would not need to slow down. It would not need to observe. A civilization millions of years ahead of us could erase entire continents without ever approaching Earth physically. Instead, the disturbing possibility is intervention. Not violent intervention, not conquest, but something far more intrusive. Guidance, manipulation, influence. What if Atlas is the first step in a long process? What if it is preparing the groundwork for contact, or for introducing ideas, technologies, or systems humanity isn't ready for? Even a well-intentioned intervention would dismantle our political structures, religious frameworks, economies, and sense of autonomy overnight. It would change what it means to be human. To many experts behind the scenes, this is not science fiction. It's simply the logical next step for a species far older and more advanced than ours. 5. The one truth nobody can escape. All these theories, hopeful, cautious, and terrifying, circle around one inescapable reality. Whatever Atlas intends to do, humanity cannot stop it. We cannot redirect it. We cannot hide from it. We cannot negotiate with it because it has not acknowledged us. We cannot force it to leave because it has technology that makes our entire aerospace industry look like primitive fire. If Atlas is staying, it is staying on its terms, not ours. This realization is what rattled world governments. Not because Atlas had acted aggressively, but because it had demonstrated a level of capability so far beyond our own that the balance of power between species became meaningless. Humanity is not a participant in this encounter. We are the observed. And yet, even with all this fear, one lingering, haunting possibility remains. What if this is just reconnaissance? What if Atlas is the first? A scout precedes an arrival. A sensor precedes a signal. A whisper precedes a voice. Whatever comes next, humanity is no longer in a universe where we decide the terms. We are in a universe where we've been noticed. For all the fears surrounding 3I, Atlas, the impossible braking, the Earth-crossing orbit, the unmatched propulsion, the element that shook humanity, the deepest wasn't its power. It wasn't its precision. It wasn't even the implication that it might be watching us. It was the silence. Silence from something capable of rewriting the laws of motion. Silence from something that adjusted its trajectory with surgical precision. Silence, from something intelligent enough to choose where it would spend the next chapters of our solar system's story. For decades, humanity believed that the first sign of extraterrestrial intelligence would come as a message, a signal, a beacon, a broadcast carefully calibrated to announce presence without causing panic. Scientists expected patterns in radio waves, sequences of prime numbers, intentional signals rising above the cosmic noise, something that said, "We are here." But Atlas said nothing. It drifted past Earth with the calm focus of a predator or a scientist or a traveler with a mission of its own. It did not transmit. It did not flash coded lights. It did not attempt contact through any of the frequencies we monitor. It behaved as though humanity's heightened expectation for communication was irrelevant to its goals. This silence became a psychological earthquake. Inside NASA, rooms normally buzzing with the excitement of discovery were now heavy with unspoken fear. Scientists who had spent their lives dreaming of alien contact found themselves dealing with something far more unsettling: alien indifference. If Atlas was a vessel, a probe, a machine, or a being, it had judged us worthy of observation, but not of conversation. And that indifference is a kind of message. It tells us that whatever intelligence guides Atlas does not need to ask permission, it does not need to negotiate, it does not need to reassure us or reveal anything about its nature. It simply exists in our space with complete freedom, unrestricted by our fears or expectations. In private meetings, psychologists warned government officials that humanity was not emotionally prepared for this kind of encounter. Humans fear the hostile, but what we fear even more is the unknowable, something that can approach us silently, study us silently, and position itself near us without a single indication of intent. Silence becomes a strategy. It amplifies uncertainty. It forces us to fill the void with our own anxieties. And fill it we did. Some imagined Atlas as a guardian, quiet and watchful. Others saw it as an advanced scout of a civilization, evaluating whether we were safe. And many feared it was something more complex, something we simply lacked the framework to understand. But the silence was not merely symbolic. It had practical implications that terrify engineers and military strategists alike. A craft that does not broadcast is a craft that cannot be easily tracked through communication signatures. A craft that does not radiate heat is designed with technology that defies our sensors. A craft that moves deliberately without visible propulsion suggests a mastery over power that goes far beyond our most advanced theories. In effect, Atlas moves through our solar system like a ghost visible only because it chooses to be. The psychological shock worsened when astronomers began to reanalyze the object's rotational behavior. Subtle changes in its reflective signature suggested that its rotation wasn't random. It wasn't behaving like a tumbling, frozen mass of ice and rock. Instead, the object seemed to stabilize itself in ways that almost looked like preparation. Slight rotational corrections, subtle orientation shifts, tiny adjustments no natural body would make. To the trained eye, this felt like a craft adjusting its posture after completing a critical phase of flight. As these findings spread through the upper echelons of global leadership, a quiet dread set in. Humanity was no longer dealing with a potential threat. We were dealing with a potential presence, something that could remain near Earth indefinitely, something that could watch without revealing what it wanted, something that could choose when or whether to make itself known. Silence had transitioned from mystery to dominance, and perhaps the most chilling realization was this: Atlas had nothing to fear from us. It had no reason to speak, no reason to acknowledge us, no reason to explain itself. It moved with the confidence of a species that understands it holds every advantage, not through hostility, but through superiority. In the psychological hierarchy of the cosmos, humanity had been abruptly demoted. We were no longer explorers, no longer observers, no longer alone. We were being watched, evaluated, judged by something that didn't think we were worth talking to. And as Atlas continued its silent glide through the darkness, one truth pressed down on the human mind with crushing weight. The universe had noticed us. and it chose to answer not with words, but with presence. For centuries, humanity stared into the night sky, believing we were the observers, the curious species peering outward, measuring distant stars, mapping invisible forces, and searching for signs that we were not alone. It was a comforting illusion, a narrative where we held the flashlight and the universe existed as a silent backdrop for our explorations. But with the arrival of 3I, Atlas, that illusion died quietly, decisively, and forever. Because for the first time, humanity isn't looking out. We are being looked at. The cascade of events triggered by Atlas, the impossible braking, the precise orbital sculpting, the silence more deafening than any threat, has pushed our civilization into a moment we were never truly prepared to face. We didn't choose contact, we didn't send a message, we didn't trigger confrontation. Something from beyond the stars simply arrived, made a decision, and rewrote the cosmic script without asking for our permission. And the most unsettling part? We don't know why. Governments, space agencies, and scientists have scrambled to explain the object's behavior, but each explanation only leads to deeper questions. If Atlas is observing us, what has it already learned? If it is a relay or an outpost, what or who might follow? If it is monitoring us, what triggered that decision? And if it is preparing for intervention, what form could that intervention take? Every possibility forces us to confront a version of the future radically different from the one we imagined. In the best-case scenario, Atlas is a silent visitor, content to watch and learn, leaving humanity to mature under its distant, inscrutable gaze. In the worst, it's the prelude to something far more transformative or destabilizing than anything we've evolved to handle. Between those extremes lies a spectrum of outcomes that could reshape our species in ways we cannot yet articulate. But regardless of intention, one truth rises above all others. Humanity is no longer the dominant intelligence in our vicinity. Our military power is irrelevant. Our technological achievements are primitive. Our political boundaries mean nothing. Our illusions of control evaporate when faced with something that rewrites orbital mechanics like a mundane chore. And as the silence continues, as Atlas drifts through space, without a signal, without explanation, without even acknowledging our frantic attempts to understand it, the psychological shift becomes inescapable. We are forced to recognize that intelligence does not behave the way we expect. It does not need to communicate in our preferred formats. It does not owe us clarity, comfort, or reassurance. Atlas is not playing by our rules because they were never its rules to begin with. Perhaps there is a message in the silence. Perhaps the message is the silence. A demonstration of presence without aggression, power without intimidation, capability without theater, as if the object is saying, without words, "We see you, we know you are here, but we do not move for you." And that is the deepest crack in the human psyche, not the fear of invasion, but the fear of irrelevance. The realization that we are no longer the protagonists of our own cosmic story. We are a subplot unfolding under the watch of something older, quieter, and infinitely more capable. What comes next is impossible to predict. In the coming weeks and months, we will learn whether Atlas stabilizes permanently into its new orbit, shifts into a closer pattern, or performs yet another maneuver that defies our understanding. We will watch. We will measure. We will debate, but we will do so knowing that our role in this encounter is fundamentally reactive. We do not guide this story. We follow it. Humanity now stands at the threshold of a new era, not because we made contact, but because contact came to us. And whether Atlas remains a mysterious sentinel drifting through our skies or becomes the opening chapter of something far greater, one thing is indisputable. We are no longer alone, and we are no longer unobserved. What we do with that truth, how we adapt, how we unify, how we face the unknown, will define the future of our species far more than any technology or political decision ever could. A new neighbor has arrived in our solar system. It does not speak. It does not ask. It does not negotiate. It simply stays. And now, humanity must decide how to live under the gaze of something that has already seen us more clearly than we have ever seen ourselves.